Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, ich darf Sie sehr herzlich zum ersten Crypto Monday begrüßen. Der Crypto Monday ist das Forschungsseminar des Forschungsinstituts für Kryptoökonomie. Und alle, die Universitäten kennen, wissen, wie viele Teilnehmer ein Forschungsseminar normalerweise hat. Üblicherweise passen die in einen kleinen Seminarraum und alle Forschungsseminare, die ich bisher in meiner akademischen Laufbahn genießen konnte, haben die Teilnehmer auf 2 Händen Platz gehabt. Dieses Mal ist es anders, und zwar so viel anders, wie ich es mir nicht erwartet hätte. Als wir die Veranstaltung geplant haben, hat mir die Shermin gesagt, ich habe einen Hörsaal für 150 Leute reserviert. Da habe ich gesagt, das ist viel zu viel, das ist ein Forschungsseminar. Ich werde zur Sicherheit einen Doodle aufsetzen. Wenn der Hörsaal zu groß ist, wechseln wir in einen kleineren. Vor 10 Tagen habe ich dann in den Doodle hineingeschaut und zu meinem Entsetzen waren 250 Anmeldungen drinnen. Daraufhin habe ich unsere Hörsaalverwaltung angerufen und die Frau Smiderer, die mich schon kennt, hat gesagt, Herr Taudes, ist Ihnen wieder Hörsaal übergegangen. Habe ich gesagt, ja, haben wir noch irgendwas? Hat sie gesagt, ja, ich habe drauf gedacht, wir haben noch den Festsaal. Aber mehr als 400 geht dann nicht. Habe ich gesagt, na gut, kann man nichts machen. Und so kam es zu diesem berühmten Hörsaal-Clinch und ich bin sehr glücklich, dass es sich so ziemlich mit 400 ausgeht. Es ist natürlich klar, dass man mit 400 Teilnehmern nicht so Forschungsseminar machen kann, wie man sich das eigentlich wünscht. Wir werden es aber trotzdem probieren. Das heißt, nach meinen launigen Einführungsworten wird es die beiden angekündigten Vorträge geben und danach werden wir doch versuchen, zumindest in einen Diskurs mit Ihnen zu treten. Das heißt, wir werden dann die Mikrofone herumgehen und wir werden halt versuchen, doch so etwas Ähnliches wie eine Seminarkultur zu machen. Wenn jemand gute Ideen hat, Sie wissen, der Crypto Monday wird eine regelmäßige Einrichtung werden, wie wir auch in der größeren Gruppe uns austauschen können, sodass jeder zu Wort kommt und Ähnliches, bitte mir mailen. Jede Art von Vorschlag, von Tool auf der Blockchain, über irgendwelche Events oder irgendwelche Möglichkeiten, dass man das auch analog macht, sind willkommen. Gut, ein bisschen Einführung. Wo stehen wir im Moment? Wir haben ein Logo. Sie glauben gar nicht, was dahinter für ein Geschäftsprozess liegt in einer größeren Organisation, aber wir haben es geschafft. Also formal ist das Forschungsinstitut bei 1.1. dieses Jahres eingerichtet worden. In der Zwischenzeit sind 20 Professorinnen und Professoren der WU diesem Forschungsinstitut zugeteilt. Eine Folie wäre zu klein für alle Bilder. Wir haben auch in der Zwischenzeit eine recht gute Webpage, die Shermin betreut und der liebe Herr Grabitsch, der eine von unseren vielen Helferlein ist, die im Moment für Gottes Lohn uns helfen. Die machen die Webpage. Also wenn Sie wissen wollen, wie es weitergeht, einfach unter Forschungsinstitut und Kryptoökonomie an der WU sehen Sie dann die ganzen Kollegen, die dabei sind. Es sind ja so gut wie allen Departments der WU Kollegen dabei. Die Shermin hat auch schon ein Büro, und zwar ist es im 1. Stock bei uns gegenüber, also gar nicht in meinem Department, weil das Department geht schon raummäßig über, sondern es gibt eigentlich im Department von den Fremdsprachen gibt es einen Reservebereich für die emeritierten Professoren. Dort hatte ich ein Zimmer, wo meine chinesischen Dissertanten gesessen sind, die jetzt zum Glück fertig sind und nach Shenzhen gehen. Und jetzt hat die Shermin das Zimmer, die das natürlich sofort umgestaltet hat. Also es gibt nicht nur dieses Schild da für Sie, sondern wir werden auch Kryptokunst in diesem Büro bekommen. Daneben ein erster Teaser wenn Sie die Shermin besuchen, also erwarten Sie derartige Dinge an der Wand. Unser größtes Projekt im Moment neben dem Aufbau des Forschungsinstituts ist das Projekt ABC. ABC steht für Austrian Blockchain Center und es soll ein Comet Center werden, an dem alle Forscher an den Universitäten und Fachhochschulen, die sich mit Blockchains beschäftigen, sich beteiligen und auch Firmenpartner und öffentliche Organisationen und internationale Partner. Also das ist im Wesentlichen die Plattform, auf der Forschung im Blockchain-Bereich in Österreich stattfinden soll. Wir arbeiten seit Jahresbeginn daran und den Antrag. Wir müssen bis Anfang Mai den Antrag fertig haben und sind im Moment fleißig dabei, Forschungsinhalte zu machen, aber auch Letters of Commitments einzusammeln bei Firmen und Partnern. Man möchte es nicht glauben, aber auf so gut wie jeder Forschungseinrichtung in Österreich gibt es eine Gruppe, die sich mit Blockchains beschäftigt. Und das ist eigentlich ein sehr positives Zeichen. Das zweite positive Zeichen ist, wir lassen den Schrebergarten hinter uns und arbeiten zusammen. Und es gibt wirklich sehr gute Forscher, sowohl an den Schwesteruniversitäten, an der TU Wien, an der Uni Wien, als auch in den außeruniversitären Forschungszentren. Ich komme gerade aus Cooking, wo wir beim IST waren, die haben eine sehr gute Kryptografiegruppe. Es gibt das Riot, die sehr gut vernetzt sind mit der internationalen Kryptoszene. Das AIT hat gerade eine große Studie gemacht und die FHs kennen sich sehr gut aus im Bereich Machine-to-Machine Communication. Meine große Bitte an alle Firmenvertreter noch unter Ihnen, bitte helfen Sie uns, indem Sie uns einen LOC unterschreiben. Der große Vorteil für Firmenpartner bei der Beteiligung an diesem angewandten Forschungsprojekt ist, es ist ungefähr so wie Licht ins Dunkel. Das heißt, für jeden Euro, den Sie für einen Dissertanten oder einen Forscher ausgeben, zahlt die öffentliche Hand einen Euro dazu. Und die öffentliche Hand in dem Fall ist der Bund, aber auch die Länder Niederösterreich und Wien. Und das ist eigentlich die beste Art und Weise, eine Gruppe aufzubauen im Kryptobereich, aber natürlich Proof of Concepts zu machen und angewandte Forschung zu betreiben. Wir haben heute auch unsere Forschungsstruktur festgelegt, wie das ABC funktionieren soll. Und die Struktur orientiert sich an so einer Schichtarchitektur einer typischen Blockchain-Anwendung. Das heißt, in der Area 1 geht es um die Basistechnologien. Also zum Beispiel am IST und an der TU gibt es Forscher, die machen wirklich neue Konzepte, Alternativen zum Proof of Work, neue kryptografische Verfahren, also wirklich Kerninformatik, da ist auch das SBA Research dabei. Die zweite Area, da geht es um ein Gebiet, um das heute geht, das wird von unserer Shermin koordiniert, da geht es um Kryptoökonomie und Anwendungen in Betriebswirtschaft und Volkswirtschaftslehre. In dieser Area tummelt sich das Forschungsinstitut an der WU. Da sind unsere Volkswirten dabei, aber auch die Betriebswirten, die die nächste Generation von Anwendungen untersuchen. Der Area 3 geht es um Anwendungen der Produktionstechnik. Da sind die Maschinenbauer von der TU und die Fachhochschulen dabei, wo es auch sehr spannende Methoden gibt und Probleme. Area 4, da ist das AIT und das Riot dabei. Der große Vorteil von Blockchains ist, die Daten sind eigentlich alle verfügbar und man kann sehr gute Sachen daraus erkennen. Und schlussendlich, wenn es nicht rechtlich okay ist, nutzen diese ganzen neuen Geschäftsmodelle nichts. Eine ziemliche Novität, normalerweise bei solchen Comet-Zentren gab es bisher keine Beteiligung der Juristen. Diesmal sind sie sehr gut beteiligt, sowohl alle unsere Juristen im Haus, aber auch die Kollegen am Juridikum, für die das natürlich ein super Hot Topic ist. Gut, Abschluss, künftige Veranstaltungen. Also Sie sehen, Sie haben immer bei uns auf der Homepage die aktuelle Liste von Veranstaltungen. Neben einem Crypto Monday, den wir irgendwann einmal machen, wenn wir uns ausgeschlafen haben, die Shermin und ich, machen wir mit einer Reihe von Partnern andere Veranstaltungen, die sehr spannend sind. Der Blockchain Hub in Graz, die Kollegen haben eine eigene österreichische Blockchain entwickelt und die präsentieren sie am 11. April. Am 16. April ist eine gemeinsame Veranstaltung mit der Fintech Academy, der Crypto Summit. Und am 7.5. machen wir gemeinsam mit der Initiative Blockchain for Science Veranstaltungen über wissenschaftliches Publizieren auf der Blockchain. Gut. Noch eine andere kurzer Hinweis auf eine andere Veranstaltung. Der World Congress via Developers hat diesmal eine Reihe von wichtigen Vertretern der Blockchain-Community im Programm und als Gruß und als Freundschaftsangebot an dieser Community gibt es für alle einen 15%igen Discount-Code. Bitte brav fotografieren. Der gilt nur bis 24.04. und 15% Discount ist eigentlich ein nettes Freundschaftsgeschenk, das uns die Kollegen hier machen. Gut, damit wäre ich mit meiner Einleitung fertig. Ich freue mich auf einen spannenden Abend und übergebe an die Frau Direktor.
So we will switch to English at this point. I'm very happy. Yes, Alfred has been saying we're overwhelmed and very happy that so many people are coming to this event, especially because I think that we're laying the foundations of what is cryptoeconomics and why did we call this Institute for Cryptoeconomics and not blockchain, actually. So I'm happy to give an introductory talk, and I'm even happier that we could get Jamsheed, who will be following up on my talk and going more into details of what I'm laying out in the beginning. And I've been approached by a few people who asked me if this event really will end at 9:30. No, it won't. I think that was a mistake. We're trying to keep it short. So the idea is that we have two short talks, as short as possible, and to give you the opportunity to ask many questions, and we will have a panel situation, walking panel situation later, where you can ask us any type of question, and we'll hopefully have some fruitful discussions and end it maximum after 2 hours. So that's more or less the time frame I was thinking of. So let me start by saying, Bitcoin is not a currency. And at some point later, you might hear me say that it is a currency, but people very often when they talk about Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, they keep referring to the currency aspect. And while Bitcoin does have certain similarities to currencies as we know it, it is much more. And the much more is actually much more interesting. So I would like to explain Bitcoin and the underlying technology, blockchain technology behind it as an operating system for a new type of economy. We'll look into that. Bitcoin is also a payment settlement layer. And while it does have certain similarities to currencies as we know it, it's a completely new asset class. And I would like to explain to you why later in this talk. Basically, the reason I got into the Bitcoin blockchain space is because I understood this. This is the world we live in today, and this is the world Bitcoin brought us. The world we live in today is a world of organizations that are very much structured in this top-down command and control way, where we have one legal entity, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, it could be a company, it could be, actually our government is run in this way, our schools, our universities, more or less every legal entity doing something with any kind of purpose is run in this top-down way, where we have one known legal entity, which means that we know who to sue if things go wrong. And this entity is comprised by certain agents, and these agents, either we know which agent to sue, and the relations of those agents are kind of managed by legal contracts. It could be employment contracts, but it could be any kind of outside contracts with partners. So if we look at how banks work today, you have a legal entity. It's, you know where this entity, where they have, it's in a certain country, you have the Handelsregister, where you can see where they're registered and who is in charge and who could be sued, etc. And this legal entity has a lot of contracts with its employees and other people they work with, and these other people and institutions are also likely to be other banks. So the relationships with other partner banks they work with is also regulated by legal contracts. So every party in this legal contract knows what they're allowed to do and what penalties they have to pay in case they don't do that. Now, Bitcoin brought us this. On the other side, Bitcoin could be seen as a decentralized autonomous organization. It's a distributed network of autonomous stakeholders who do not know and trust each other by default. They might live in completely different worlds. They might speak very different languages. Maybe some of them know and trust each other, but most of them don't. And they have different roles. You have the users, you have the miners who verify the transactions, the users who have their Bitcoin wallets and send and receive Bitcoin. You have developers who contribute with code. You have exchanges and other service providers who build on top of the infrastructure. And in this distributed network of autonomous actors has no centralized legal entity that governs how these actors work with each other, and there is no such thing as an employment contract. The way this entity is governed is by rule of code. Governance is in the code of the Bitcoin blockchain protocol. It's open source, so everybody knows the rules. Everybody who can read the code knows the rules, and if you don't know how to read the code, you can at least ask someone else to read it for you and to explain to you what's written in the code, but everything is very, very transparent as opposed to this world. And this is a huge game changer, but how do you make sure that a distributed network of actors who do not know and trust each other do what they're supposed to do? So in the world we live in today, it's a world of data monarchy. Data is stored in a way in a very centralized way. So in the case of a bank, it's stored on the server of a bank, and when you make a remittance from one bank to the other, you send it through the server of your bank, verifies it, and communicates with the server of another bank. In most cases, there are some intermediary banks involved. In the case of Bitcoin, everyone in the network has the same information. And if you send Bitcoin from one wallet to another wallet, it's done entirely peer-to-peer. There is no centralized institution verifying the transaction. The peer-to-peer network, all the computers in the network get to verify the transactions. And if the majority of the network agrees that the transaction is true, the transaction will be verified. And this is possible because Bitcoin is comprised of 3 different layers. The protocol sits on top of the internet. And layer number 1 are all the computers who are part of the network. It's the peer-to-peer network of computers. Every computer or everyone who has a computer can download the code and start being part of the Bitcoin network, verifying transactions. The second part is the consensus protocol. And this is what we're talking about today. The rules and the incentive mechanisms that make sure that network actors perform according or verify transactions according to the rules. So who's allowed to do what and when, and how are they incentivized? All this is governed in the consensus layer. And last but not least, you have the asset layer. It's a record of transactions. It's a database that states exactly who did what and when, who owned how much Bitcoin, what and when. And that copy of that database, every node in the network, every computer in this peer-to-peer network has the copy of the same application state. So the question is, why is that important? Because if I were to manipulate a transaction and try to pretend on my computer that I have more Bitcoin than I have, like let's say I have 0.5 Bitcoin and I want to send you 2 Bitcoin, but I don't have that. I could try and manipulate my computer, which is probably not that trivial in itself. But if I send a transaction, the rest of the network will verify that transaction and they will say it's not true. We have a different type of information. So in order to manipulate a transaction, I would have to manipulate probably the majority of the network because I don't know which 51% will be the fastest to confirm the transactions. So when the network doesn't comprise of 9 nodes, as in the case of this graphic, but of 100,000 of nodes. So how do I make sure that these different actors who do not know and trust each other verify the transactions in a truthful way? And this is what we refer to as cryptoeconomics, and this is what's written into the consensus mechanism. It's in Bitcoin what we call the proof of work consensus mechanisms. It's designed it's an incentive mechanism that incentivizes network actors, the verifiers that verify transactions. The fastest computer to verify a transaction can get a block reward and mine at the current state 12.5 Bitcoin. So people are rewarded to contribute to the network performance of verifying transactions and keeping the network safe from attacks, because it's designed in an attack-resistant and fault-tolerant way. The mining of Bitcoin rewards the verifiers to keep the network safe, and the mechanism designed behind it prevents network attacks, prevents corruption of transactions, and makes the network fault-tolerant. And we will hear a bit more from Jamsheed later. It's designed in a way that if the majority of the computers fail, the network will still be intact if certain nodes try to collude with each other, it makes it very, very expensive to collude and try to attack the network from within. And that design mechanism is not trivial. And this cryptoeconomic aspect was actually the biggest breakthrough with Bitcoin, because we've had peer-to-peer networks before, and we've had cryptography before, and we've had cryptographically empowered peer-to-peer networks before, but they were never incentivized through a consensus mechanism, through a cryptoeconomic consensus mechanism. Now, we've all heard in the media that Bitcoin is not good for the environment because it uses a lot of energy. So people are already trying to work on alternative consensus mechanisms in order to find an alternative consensus mechanisms that are more environmentally friendly. One of them possibly proof of stake, but there are also many, many other consensus mechanisms, and we're at the very beginning, but we'll hear more later about that too. So the big game changer here being centralized systems have a unique point of failure. Distributed or more decentralized systems, even if you take a lot of the nodes fail, the system will stay intact. Plus, it makes it much, much, much more expensive to attack the network. To sum it up, cryptoeconomics incentivizes behavior. The question is, what's the aim of Bitcoin? Bitcoin's aim was to be peer-to-peer money without banks. In order to achieve that, and what do banks do? Their basic role is remittances. So in order to have peer-to-peer money without banks, you have to incentivize people to make true verify transactions in a truthful way. So the question is, what do you want to incentivize? Transactions, and this is what the proof of work protocol does. In the end, the question that is resolved is, how do we get people to do stuff? We pay them for doing that work. We reward them with a token. And in that case, it's Bitcoin. This is why many people refer to Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies as programmable money. You can basically program the what is it called in economics? The monetary policy of this distributed internet tribe is basically set in the code. It's nothing else than what we in a centralized system would call monetary policy. A mistake that is very often made is people think Bitcoin actually, the term is misleading. It's not a coin. It's not a physical file, nor is it a digital file that you can send from A to B. It's basically just simply an entry in a distributed database. It's not a file. It's not a coin. And so to sum it up, Bitcoin and all the blockchain tokens that came afterwards are currencies of distributed internet tribes. The rules of that tribe, including the monetary policy of the token, are governed by a computer code that runs on a peer-to-peer network of computers or devices. And that code is automatically enforced when predefined conditions are met. And that's the real revolutionary aspect of what Bitcoin brought us and the underlying blockchain technology. So that sounds very much back to the future, but it's not, because the future is already here. And if we look at this, for example, today we have a lot of alternative currencies to Bitcoin. Why? Because Bitcoin is open source. Anyone could take that code, fork it, amend it, try to make a faster Bitcoin, a more anonymous Bitcoin, because Bitcoin actually is not anonymous, it's pseudonymous. So we have, we've had many people trying to do different versions of peer-to-peer money, but also kind of different types of tokens that have different functions, like, for example, incentivizing solar energy production, etc., like SolarCoin in the early days. And today, we have, if you go to CoinMarketCap today, who's been on CoinMarketCap? Who's buying, trading? A few? Okay. So if you go to CoinMarketCap today, I don't have the exact numbers of today, but I think we're already approaching 2,000 crypto assets I would like to refer to. Most of these assets were never designed to be currencies in the first place. That's actually an old screenshot from maybe a month ago, so it's not correct. It's not today's screenshot. We have CoinMarketCap listed maybe 2,000-ish, a little less, but there are many other crypto assets out there. Most of them are not designed to be peer-to-peer money, maybe 20 of them, like Bitcoin, Monero, Zcash, etc. The rest are different type of crypto assets or asset-backed tokens, and we will get into this. So I was thinking of, because we have the numbers here, just as a point of reference, like a month ago, the market cap of Bitcoin was 180 billion US dollars. And I was tempted to compare it. And then I was like, what do I compare it to? Do I compare it to market cap of a company? And then we're around, like, HSBC had more or less the same market cap at that point, or Comcast. Or do I compare it to GDP of a country? What is it? Is it the future company or the future country, or a hybrid of both? And if you compare Bitcoin's market cap a month ago, it would have been comparable to New Zealand or Iraq GDP. So this is more or less the numbers. But what is Bitcoin as a token, or what are crypto tokens? There is certainly a currency aspect to it, because these tokens are not really fungible, should be liquid, store of value that can be transferred peer-to-peer without a bank or any other middleman. So there is a currency aspect to that token. But at the same time, these tokens are very often also fuel of the network, because Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer network of computers, and you pay transaction fees for any type of remittance you do. So from that perspective, Bitcoin, you pay for money transactions, for remittances in Bitcoin. In the Ethereum network, you would pay not for money remittances, but it's like computing power, because Bitcoin, Ethereum was designed for a completely other purpose. We'll get into that. In the SIA network, you would be paying for file storage. So here it's kind of a commodity of the network, it's the fuel of the network, and you need the commodity of that network to pay for network services within that network. And another aspect that these kind of tokens have could be the speculation aspect. From a speculation perspective or a network perspective, every stakeholder who has a stake in the system, even though you're just building a company on top of it, you're kind of a stakeholder, so you're interested to contribute with the best to contribute to the network to make it more powerful, more resilient, so your stake in the system will be worth more. So there are very big network effects in that cryptoeconomic calculation of it. So what's Ethereum? I'm jumping a bit, but time is short, so we can answer questions later. As I said, Bitcoin was open source. Anyone could take the fork it and do some better version of peer-to-peer money. But a lot of people try to do completely different types of programmable assets with Bitcoin. That proved to be a bit complicated, because Bitcoin was designed to be peer-to-peer money, and it did that well, but it wasn't designed to do other stuff. And when Ethereum came, they said, why don't we just decouple the computational layer from verifying transactions, but we don't care if it's money or anything else, from the smart contract layer, and made it really easy to, with a few lines of code, build a decentralized application on top of that decentralized world computer, that peer-to-peer network called Ethereum network. And you could now, with a simple smart contract, or you can, with a few lines of code, create your own decentralized autonomous organization, and put the governance with a certain governance policy, tie it to a token, and create your own decentralized autonomous organization, a decentralized application, or simply an asset-backed token. So we have two layers here now. On the Ethereum blockchain layer, you have a native blockchain token. You pay for computation to that decentralized network. And on top of that, you can basically, it's a WordPress for creating your own currency. I could learn how to program Solidity and program my own, create my own coin and start selling Shermin coin tomorrow. The question is, will you buy a Shermin coin? And how is the Shermin coin designed? We'll get into that also in Jamsheed's talk. So while Bitcoin revolutionized peer-to-peer money, Ethereum probably revolutionized peer-to-peer fundraising, because now, and I think nobody really expected that, but last year it turned out to be the year of ICOs. ICO stands for initial coin offerings, which is kind of a peer-to-peer fundraising mechanism, completely peer-to-peer, on the Ethereum blockchain in that case, and without any middleman. And you can pre-sell your own tokens and coins and get some fiat currency for it or other cryptocurrencies for it. And last year alone, we saw ICOs worth of 4 billion more that did some fundraising peer-to-peer, mostly on the Ethereum blockchain. And this year, I think we're soon to surpass 3 billion, and it's only 3 months into the year. So while last year was the year of application tokens, and we'll talk about that, I think that this year will be the year of maybe asset-backed tokens, like the Venezuelan petro token, or what Kodak is doing, nobody knows what it really is. It's like tokenize the economy. I think I would have expected this to happen maybe in 2 or 3 years. Turns out that the current economy is catching on pretty soon. and way sooner than I personally expected. So, but what kind of blockchain tokens do we have out there? We've seen the native blockchain tokens, and when it comes to cryptoeconomics, that is quite well designed. Most native blockchain tokens are based on a proof of work consensus, very similar to Bitcoin's proof of work consensus. There are few blockchains that have different consensus mechanisms. We do have on the application tokens now, most of them are maybe usage or utility tokens. Some of them are asset-backed tokens, which are basically tokens that represent a physical good, which could be gold or a diamond or even a ticket to a concert. It could be any kind of service. And we've heard before, there are many different ways to analyze these tokens, because the problem is that we have this new technology, but we don't know how to describe it, because the greatest challenge is that we're trying to describe a new phenomenon with words from an old world. And we have a whole day on the 16th of April. The Token Investment Summit will have one whole day to go into the details of what types of tokens do we have, and from which from a legal status, you have completely different definitions of a token than from a technical layer. You would analyze it in a very differently, or if you would look at the purpose of a token, you would analyze it differently. If you would look at the utility of a token, you would analyze it differently. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into details, but Elfriede Sixt is here, who's organizing the conference, and you'll find the information online. We'll go into great more detail at that conference. We also have tools like how to evaluate like a token. We've developed a token valuation canvas, but that's also not part of the talk today. In the end, the question is Bitcoin a currency? Well, yes, it is in a way, but, and that's my personal opinion, I'm happy to discuss this with you later. If anything, in my opinion, Bitcoin resembles much more what we've known as commodity currencies in the past than the fiat currencies that we're using now. Why is that so? Because of the nature of its decentralized production. It's not issued by a centralized institution. Commodities like gold, like oil, etc., mostly have decentralized productions, as you would have with those kind of blockchain tokens. And the price is also determined by supply and demand on a market, just as the commodity exchanges. It's not controlled by a central bank. We do have phenomenon like stable coins at the moment. They're trying to kind of peg it to currencies, but that's a different topic in its own. If anything, so I think Bitcoin is more close to what we've known as commodity money, only that now these tokens have much higher liquidity than commodities of the past. And the question is, what does that do with our economy in the future if we can put any type of asset and make it a token? What will become of money as we know it? And well, Bitcoin, yes, it is some kind of money, but it's also this payment network. And it's a completely new way to incentivize or to manage a society in a completely decentralized way. And the way we incentivize a distributed network of actors is by the mechanism design behind the token. Ethereum has made it very, very, very easy to, with a few lines of code, you can create your own money. You can, but the question is, how do you design it, right? And we haven't figured that out, and this is going to be one of our research areas. What is the mechanism design behind Bitcoin? That we have figured out, but if I were to, for example, create a jungle token today, if I would like to not incentivize people to verify financial transactions in a truthful way, what if I want to incentivize people to plant a tree instead of cutting it? And every time they would prove that the tree has been standing for a year, and the second year, and the third year, and I could verify it with geodata, they could create their own jungle token. And the more people participate, the more it's worth. That sounds very tempting, right? I could create a currency. Anyone who wants to participate in that game could participate in that game. But the problem is, if I design it in a not very sustainable way, I might end up with trees all over the world. And I need deserts, and I need a sea, and I need place to build a house. If I don't design it in a meaningful way, everybody starts planting trees, and then we have a world that's maybe not very sustainable either. And the same applies to a CO2 token. If I want to incentivize people to reduce CO2 emission, we do need a certain amount of CO2 in our atmosphere. So I do have to look into the complexities and the combinations of, I have to understand the technology aspect of it, but I also have to understand the economics aspect of it, like behavioral economics, mechanism design, econometrics, monetary policy. I have to understand business and finance. I have to understand legal aspects of these cryptographic tokens, and also the legal aspect if I were to incentivize planting trees all over the world. I would have to probably consider 200 different jurisdictions. So how do I do that? And I have to consider social scientists. So I think why blockchain is so fascinating and the cryptoeconomics is so fascinating, because it's basically everything we don't know about money and the economy and cryptography and peer-to-peer networks combined. And this makes it highly complex, and this is also one of the reasons that we created this interdisciplinary research institute. Follow us also on Twitter. And on our website, you can see our events. I'd like to conclude saying it's like 1990 for the internet. It's really, really early in the game. We don't know how cryptoeconomics will pan out. We do know that we have the first non-blockchain crypto projects like Tangles, etc. They don't even have a blockchain, but they have very similar mechanisms. And I think my personal forecast for 2018 is 2018 might be the year of tokenizing real assets, like the Kodak token that has been announced and nobody knows what it is, or the Petro token. That's actually a non-brainer. And I think it will be the year where we'll hear much more about cryptoeconomics, mechanism design, and incentivizing behavior. So I'd like to pass on to Jamsheed to come on stage and talk more about that. Thank you.
So first, welcome and good evening. And thanks very much for having me out here. Thanks to the Institute and also especially to Shermin. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here once again in Vienna. I have been here in the past working at the Institute for Advanced Studies back when it actually had an academic research program in cooperation with the University of Vienna, the VU, the Technical University, and so on. So it's really nice to come back into an area where what we're looking at is an expansion of what we have already worked in economics and finance for many years. In a completely novel direction. And so what I'd like to talk to you about this evening is in a way, springboarding off of what Shermin has already talked about with regard to value of these tokens that are being built and how, in fact, to design these tokens. One of the things that we haven't really discussed up until this point is what's novel about this application layer once you start looking at how to design a token. How do you actually build a token on top of the blockchain, on top of a particular implementation of a blockchain? This is something which is, and I hope to be able to show you, and certainly to not necessarily convince you, but at least open it up for discussion, is going to require a different kind of set of tools. Not necessarily new tools, but a new application to something we haven't really been used to using before. Now, it's not an entirely new, completely new application. It's something that people have been thinking about for a long time. How do you ascribe value to things that are being used as a medium of exchange? And to start that off, let me give you sort of a way to think about this that's very, very old. The title slide here is a painting. This is from Peter Bruegel the Younger, painted in 1621. And it's called The Village Lawyer, the Boerenadvocaat in Flemish. The idea here is that there is a lawyer that represents the village for the government who collects taxes on land. And you can see this guy. He's in the right. On the right-hand side there he is perusing paper, the bureaucratic trappings of a central authority, which make it very, very difficult for farmers to understand what's going on. How do they value what it is that they have for land? But that central authority requires payment. And as you see, the individuals in the middle of the picture are paying. But they're not paying with coin. The coin of the realm at that time was, I think, the guilder, the Dutch guilder, or following up on the florin. Here they're not using that at all. They're using a duck or a pheasant, eggs, agricultural produce. These are tokens. These are representations of the value that they were expected to pay on the basis of the land that was being valued. So we have this notion that it's a very old problem, but it's also a very new application area. And so just as an idea to keep this in the back of your mind, that what we're attempting to do is to build now a self-consistent environment for which tokens can be valued and for which tokens can be designed. Because the novel feature here is that we can design these things without such a central authority. So let me pick up a bit from where Shermin left off on this division between native blockchain tokens, which is a better way of saying it than coins, as I'm describing them here. A coin associated with a blockchain directly for the implementation of its protocol, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, can be contrasted to tokens that are built on top of a smart contract protocol. For example, things that are built on Ethereum, like Tron, Golem, and Augur. Tron is an entertainment, decentralized entertainment provision platform. Golem is designed or hoping to be designed as the world's first decentralized supercomputer. And Augur works in prediction markets to be able to reinforce and build reputation on predicting events and then reporting on those events truthfully without a central authority verifying whether or not those events took place. So we have three different types of use for these tokens. This would be construed as what is called a utility token, a token that has a use in the particular protocol that's being defined. But notice, those three are running on Ethereum. Ethereum has its own coin, its own native blockchain token, and it pays for the transactions that take place in the smart contract. That's called gas. So the Ether is being used for what is called gas, and that implies that app tokens built on Ethereum probably have some of its value ascribed to the underlying value of Ether. There should be a mapping that connects app tokens built on Ethereum with Ethereum. And the question is how much? We've already defined three, in this case, an example of three smart tokens, of three tokens themselves, that themselves are using different applications. They have different utility. Now, at the same time, they're all using Ethereum. So where's the pull coming from? Is Ethereum going to pull the value along if all we look at is the price of this token as representation of its value? Or are these guys going to go their own way depending upon whether or not and how those tokens are actually being used? So here's some quick time series. On the right-hand side, you see the log time series of several different native blockchain tokens and these app tokens built on top. This is from between September and February, September 2017 and February of this year. So right at the speculative bump, when people were getting into this for the first time, where it was really hitting the mainstream as to what a cryptocurrency entails. On the left-hand side, I've put up a very simple correlation matrix. Correlations range between 1 and -1. 1 is a perfect correlation where if one thing goes up, something else also goes up. If it's -1, if one thing goes up, something else goes down. So perfect correlation or perfect anti-correlation. And I've highlighted the column with Ethereum. And then there are 4 of these tokens. I've included EOS, which is actually its own decentralized platform. We'll be spinning off from Ethereum soon. But Tron, Golem, and Augur are all 3 here. And you can see that the correlation coefficients range from at least 0.81 in the movement of the value of these tokens with respect to the value of the movements of Ether. So even though these tokens do remarkably different things, there is, in a sense, an overwhelming preponderance of the value being pulled along by the value of Ether. Okay, so we have to say, okay, well, given the fact that there is this dimension of the utility token, where is it? Have we lost it? Is it found? Is it buried somewhere in the value? Do we need to look deeper? Let me give you a second example. So keep that in mind. ICOs. As mentioned before, ICOs are token sales or token pre-sales. You maybe have a sale of the right to have a token once a particular protocol comes online. And as Shermin mentioned, it's just going bananas in terms of investment. It's roughly 1.4, 1.6 billion per month invested in ICOs up through about mid-January or so. Less of late, as you probably remember or probably have read, yesterday the US Securities and Exchange Commission said that it was actually actively investigating dozens of ICOs to see whether or not they actually have been confounding securities with tokens of other use. That's something which you should keep in mind in the example which I'm going to give in just a moment, which is Tezos. How many of you have heard of Tezos prior to now a little bit? Some people. It made a big splash when it was launched. The Tezos Foundation launched an ICO in July of 2017 with a goal of introducing a token that would improve governance. They wanted to, in a sense, get around the deadlock that had occurred with Bitcoin. The Bitcoin tribes made it very difficult to update the Bitcoin protocol, and what they wanted to do and what they claimed they were going to do is introduce a new token for governance that would allow individuals holding these tokens in proportion to the amount that they held to have a voice to very quickly update and change the network, the protocol itself, so to improve the blockchain governance. And in this pre-sale offer, they raised $230 million, which at the time was one of the largest, after Ethereum, that had been performed for a token which had not yet been released, for a blockchain which had not yet been set up. And this token called the Tez was a combined, by what they stated, their own self-statement as to what it was for, was as a combined utility token, that is a token that is used on the blockchain, like a native blockchain token, and a governance token to solve this problem of being able to change the protocol without conflict. Unfortunately, by October 2017, it became clear that all was not well within the Tezos Foundation. There was a very, very, very bitter, controlled dispute between the original founders and the appointed CEO of the Tezos Foundation, which was a nonprofit arm of the Tezos group that controlled the cryptocurrencies that were invested in the presale. By February 22nd, this internal control dispute was resolved with the resignation of that individual who was the head of the Tezos Foundation. And at that point, people said, okay, now we're going to gear up for the release of the coin, of the code for the blockchain. Immediately, there was an increase in the value of the Tez in pre-sale exchange. So it's not even a market for the coin itself, it's a market for the right to be able to get the coin later on. So now you see why the Securities and Exchange Commission might be a little bit leery of this, if this is a right, but not necessarily an obligation to purchase an asset at some point in the future. It sounds a little bit like an option or a derivatives. And the question is, well, since the price bounced around with regard to things that are like an internal family spat within the Tezos Foundation, can we really think that Tez was designed to reflect some sort of intra-foundational or intra-firm control issue? And the answer is no. Again, we see that what is happening here is that people's probability of, well, now we know that it's more likely for this coin to actually have value. Now it's going to get bumped because people are going to invest in it. We know that's swamping whatever it was that people had already attempted to price in as the value of the utility token and the value of the governance token. On top of that, Tezos itself decided to change what it considered the ICO sale to be, perhaps because of the unwarranted attention or unwanted attention from the US SEC. They said it was actually a donation. A donation denominated in the future rights to hold the Tezos token, the Tez in the future, but it was a donation. And a few interviews with the investors who are now donators at that time revealed that they had markedly different ideas about what they were getting into than donating 230 million US. So, as I mentioned before, the Securities and Exchange Commission thinks otherwise. They think, hey, this is actually a new kind of token. It's not a utility token. It's not a governance token. It's a security token. It's a token that confers on you a right to future claims on the proceeds generated by that company or that organization, or by the activities that the blockchain undertakes. So here again, we see the confounding of these different types of tokens, the different types of values of what we should constitute a single token, one token, to have. Well, maybe that happens for some tokens. Maybe some tokens are confused. We could take Bitcoin as an example of a token which is fairly unconfused in the sense that it has a way to value it objectively. It's energy. Right? Energy, the energy, electricity required to put it in there, the resources that are sunk in order to solve that very cool but very complicated cryptographic problem is a way to impute a value of Bitcoin. And as we've seen already, as you've seen just from watching the news or even reading the headlines over the last few weeks, the speculative value itself runs rampant on top of this. So the signal-to-noise ratio is just too low. We don't get enough signal about what the underlying value is. We get an awful lot of noise from speculation. And so as a result, the original discussion about how Bitcoin could be used as a payment mechanism, as a storage of value, as a medium of exchange, that part of the conversation has been lost. That valuation is lower than we would have expected, or is in some cases completely absent. As we saw the massive rush into Bitcoin, transactions fees started to dominate the value of the transaction. You could no longer pay for something for a cup of coffee with a Bitcoin because the cup of coffee would cost you the €2 plus a €24 transaction fee to make sure your transaction was included in the blockchain. Not the best deal. So in each of these three examples, we see a confounding of value. These coins are doing things, these tokens are doing things that in a way have never been done before. The type of multi-purposeness that has been built into this through the various architects of the coins and the tokens as they are being offered are providing something that the price system, as it stands now, can't support. And this leads to a question, all right, if we're going to start designing this, well then perhaps we have to start thinking hard about how we set the game up from the beginning. What is the value of one of these tokens? Before, you may have thought, well, the value is what the market commands. That's what we all learn. That's what I teach, right? The supply and demand will tell you the value. But in reality, we're losing a lot of the conversation in that way. And so I think what's necessary is a readjustment of our thinking for these kinds of instruments, let's call them, assets. And think of them inherently as multi-valued. They are no longer single-valued that you just put onto a market and trade, and then the price reflects exactly what it is that they're useful for. That's not true. It's a vector. It lives in some space. I use the real number system here, just RD, just as a way of saying numbers that we're all used to. But of course, these could be individual sets of any kind, because how you decide to measure the utility of a token may not be defined in real numbers. It may be very useful, not useful. May be useful for accomplishing a task with a success or a failure, so you have the binary space, and so on. Now, token design requires getting all of these valuations right. You have to be able to set these things up, and we're going to go through that in the remainder of the talk. Fine-tuning now becomes an issue not about buying and selling. Fine-tuning now becomes an issue between the creator of the token and the token recipient to figure out exactly what it is that those spaces should be, those R's, and also how many factors is the token representing. What's that D? This is a collectively endogenous problem. Collectively, because everybody jointly determines what a token is used for. No matter what the creator of the token says, there may be a use case that is not followed. Without proper design, a token may simply be used for one aspect, ignoring all the others, like Bitcoin's speculative value. It's endogenous because it's coming from within. There is no central authority saying, this is what this coin is for. And this is a bit of a cautionary tale. I'll come back to this, because you don't want people coming from the outside saying this is what these coins have to be for. What you want is to be part of the conversation and say to the people who have the legal authority to tell you what your coins are for, and say to them, look, we've designed this in such a way that this is what the coin is for. So we'll look at regulation in just a few minutes. Okay, now you need to measure a value. Once you've got these particular dots that you need to look at, each one has to have a particular valuation, and I'm an economist, so I'm going to go with the easiest thing that I know of and say, well, if I'm going to value something as a utility token, as a security token, as a governance token, I'm always going to look at what's my next best alternative. And saying that there is no next best alternative, well, it's both an answer and not an answer, right? It just means perhaps that the opportunity cost is infinite, if it's truly something unique that has never been done before, but most likely something can be done, it's just really, really hard. Like an asset-backed token, well, an asset-backed token gives you the right to be able to move a commodity such as gold without having to physically move it. Now, we've done stuff like that before, like forward contracts without actually having delivery of gold on your doorstep. So we know that this is possible to be able to do. And then there's a value-added component, which gives us the value that is giving us the extra benefit of using this particular modality rather than the next best alternative. So a few quick examples. If you have a utility token, well, the next best protocol or the next best incentive will be part of that opportunity cost. For a security, the next best investment or investment portfolio, or if it's an asset-backed token, then it's the next value of the underlying, and here derivatives and options pricing comes into play. If it's governance, well, you're going to find a metric for centralization versus decentralization versus peer-to-peer. Some way of understanding how it is that governance can be self-reinforcing, that's the next part of the equation, which we'll get to. But you will have a valuation of why is it better for me to have no central authority? That's a question that has to be answered. I know for a lot of us it's just like, well, it's obvious, right? We just don't want people messing with us. That's nice. But it's good to have a measurement. You know, that marginal amount of being messed with, well, that'll be the opportunity cost, right? And finally, speculation, that's the easiest one. Right? The market is telling you what the next best alternative is, and the exchange rates between one cryptocurrency and another gives you some information as to what the valuation of that is. Okay, now once you have measurement, you have to find a way to sustain that measurement so that you can transfer value from one person to the next. These are not buy and hold once instruments. They are meant to be traded. They are actively traded between individuals. And to have that kind of sustainability, you need game theory. Now, game theory is a strategic interaction between players or between groups of players. It's very, very, very old. Well, at least games are very, very, very old. This is an example of an amphora from ancient Greece. 500 BC, you have Achilles on the left and Ajax on the right, playing an unknown game. Right? So we know people play games considering everybody else's rules, and we know a lot about what we expect as an equilibrium to come out, and we know a lot about how those particular equilibrium, one equilibrium concept in particular, the Nash equilibrium, affects the technology layer, as Shermin mentioned, of Bitcoin. The Nash equilibrium is a conditional optimality. Basically, it's a recipe saying, look, everybody gets a list, says do this. This is my Nash equilibrium. And if I do this and everybody else is doing this, then I never find it in my best interest to do something else. It's an assumption. It assumes everybody else is doing the Nash equilibrium. But as long as everybody else is, well, it turns out to be best for me. And that's really important for protocols and consensus and governance. Among other things, it prevents us from double spending, from spending 2 tokens when we only have 1. It prevents invalid chains. In the Bitcoin, for example, it's the longest chain that's considered the valid chain. So in order to create the longest chain, you need a massive amount of horsepower to be able to undo other transactions and unwind all the way back to a fork point where you want to introduce double spending. And it allows you to change the protocol without a central authority. That's the governance aspect of this, where people can actually say, all right, who has an incentive to deviate from the plan? And the plan is a Nash equilibrium. All right, so that's part of the story for value sustainability. The other part is, all right, once I know that I can sustain value, and once I know that these are multi-valued, how do I create one? And that's the realm of mechanism design. Mechanism design is the design of incentives such that individuals go along in a truthful fashion with what is required. And there's a very famous tweet here by Professor Arvind Narayanan at Princeton saying, look, you got to look at mechanism design. So it's kind of like an advertisement, right? So even if you don't like the rest of the slide, at least know that he said it was a nice idea. The idea behind mechanism design is pretty easy. If you've got people and you've got private information, like do they like this token? What would they use this token for? What is it that they actually have in their back pocket? Can they masquerade as somebody else? Or will they do something which you don't really intend? Well, what you want to do is build a framework conditional upon what it is that they may do, anything that they may do. And you build that framework so that at the end you arrive at the goal that you wish. So in a way, it's kind of like, it has been referred to as sort of inverse game theory. Game theory looks at all of the setup, the players, the strategies, and the payoffs, and then says, okay, well then, what's the outcome? Whereas mechanism design says, I have the outcome, I know what I would like to have, how do I get there? And key to this is what's called the revelation principle. The revelation principle says that no matter how complicated the type of mechanism that you design, the framework that you design to elicit somebody else's response in some optimal fashion, there's always going to be one where you can have that individual or group of individuals simply tell you the truth. They don't pretend to be somebody else. They don't have incentives to pretend to be somebody else. So for example, if you are introducing a token which is a utility token, and you design it properly in the sense that you only want it to be a utility token without speculative value, well then what you don't want are people to use it for speculative value. In other words, to be a type of individual while saying, yes, I'm buying your token because I really want to use it on your blockchain, and then turn around and try to sell it as fast as they can. So mechanism design is a way in which we can find the framework that builds that vector now, those multiple values that each of these tokens can have, chooses which of those values is important to the creator of the token, and then sees how the recipient of the token responds. And you build this in an optimal framework. The really nice thing about mechanism design is that it is self-reinforcing. And in cases of dispute where disputes are deadlocked, you always have arbitration from an outside authority. Most of the time you try to design a mechanism so that people don't actually have a need to go to the courts, but some mechanisms will always have that because you're always going to have people who are simply intransigent. They are always going to say, look, I'm just going to take my money and see you in court. That's not a weakness of mechanism design, rather it's part of mechanism design. And again, we're going to get into the legal ramifications of regulation a bit later. Okay, I've got 3 slides I'm going to go through very quickly on mechanism design examples from finance and economics. The underlined links here are in the copy of the slide deck that you guys will be able to download either from the website or from my own website. Those links are all to the papers, so you'll be able to click on those and get the DOIs or the reference to the journals. Finance and political economy examples, I'll skip over those and go right to cryptoeconomics and the origin of mechanism design there. Of course, it comes from the white paper from Bitcoin, from the individual or group of Satoshi Nakamoto. This was an application of pre-existing consensus methods, such as proof of work, which makes Bitcoin work. It's a game theoretic solution, but it's designing a mechanism so that the outcome that you want, which is transactions, verification, voluntarily, by nodes that then get rewarded as part of their own self-interest, can function without a central authority. And the quantum leap here was the application of cryptography in such a way that there is really no incentive to deviate for any one individual, provided that they remain a relatively small part of the network as a whole. Once they become the network, 51%, things fall apart because they can dictate terms, if you will. But the really nifty thing about cryptography is that because it's hard and it's difficult to unwind, this immediately reinforces the idea that the path of least resistance is the one you should choose. A lot of mechanism design problems can be formulated such that what you actually end up having as an equilibrium is the path of least resistance. Now, since then, we've seen a lot of research refining this notion of how to use the game theory side to work on consensus and governance mechanisms. Two examples, one's from the University of Pittsburgh Law Journal on Bitcoin as a game. The second one is actually the Game Theoretic Foundations for another cryptocurrency called ADA from Cardano's blockchain network. There is some research on looking at tokens from a mechanism design point of view when that single value channel, if you will, the price of this token, is the thing that you're using to measure value. I would also point out that that blockchannelmedium.com link, when you get there, click on that because it gives a wonderful overview, a sort of a baseline overview of what mechanism design is, building upon and fleshing out further some of the details that I've touched on already here. But as far as I know, and certainly during the Q&A, I hope somebody maybe has an idea of something they've already seen, there is no extant research on designing mechanisms when you look at tokens inherently providing a multi-valued capability. Okay, so let me quickly summarize where we are. My argument here is just that we should be looking at these things as new things. These are really new. These are inherently new objects. We haven't had assets or asset classes that can do all of the things that a token can do. And that's by virtue of the fact that it is very easy to construct and it is also very powerful to move. So we have a utility value, which defines the interaction with the protocol and incentivizes behavior. We have a securities value, which is actually a claim on future consumption. Every security is what you give up today in order to get a share of something for tomorrow. You have a governance value, which is rights management. The market, of course, dictates a speculative value. And then, of course, there's an angle for fundraising and crowdfunding, pre-sales, pre-seed ICO, and alternatives to venture capital. That last one, of course, is where the SEC is getting involved, and there are some regulation issues. There are also social issues and cultural norms issues that are coming on board in that last one. I was at an event on ICOs last week in Brussels, and one of the speakers said, actually was a representative from the Belgian National Bank, said, why is it, it's a question to firms that were launching ICOs, said, why aren't you just using the usual routines, the funding routines for venture cap? This is an obvious thing to do. These are all well understood methods of funding a startup. Just use those instead of these dangerous ICOs, which they couldn't recommend anybody use. And a member of the audience said, well, who is it that's usually sitting in the room judging your startup? There's a pause. And she said, a middle-aged white man is usually in the room judging my startup. My startup is an Uber for hairstylists. I could not get traction on the basis, and this was her opinion, of the cultural impact that I had when sharing the space with a traditional VC user. For her, the idea of an ICO, of a token, was a way to break a traditional bargaining model and introduce a new method of funding. Again, something very hard to value and something really tough to value simply as the value of a coin. How do you internalize that? It's very tricky. Now, there has to be a way forward, and so I'll propose one way forward, and that's to introduce a multi-objective function. We've got a vector on that left-hand side of V. That's a bunch of things. That's the values of this particular token. There has to be a way to match that with what people do. The small s's are strategies pulled from strategy sets from players, in this case, n different players, n different individuals. And the U, in traditional mechanism design, is a social welfare function or a social choice function or a decision function, some method of aggregating the behaviors of individuals, and what comes out as evaluation. Well, how do you use this? Well, what you do is you look for points combinations of value such that if you try to increase any one of them by even a little bit, you cannot do so without dropping the value of one of the other components. That's a notion that's very, very common in economics and finance, Pareto optimality. Pareto optimality is the notion that you can't increase one side without decreasing the other, and so you end up with a surface of solutions, a class of solutions of values that comes out of this particular problem. From that, you add constraints, like incentive compatibility, like resource constraints, and hopefully, if you're very lucky or very unlucky, you pick out a single point on that Pareto frontier, and that's your equilibrium, or you pick out a range of points that you can offer in the mechanism design problem. Solving this is tricky, but not unknown. We do this a lot when we look at social welfare functions, and we do this a lot when looking at operations decision theory. Operations research has an entire subclass called multi-criteria decision making. Now these surfaces, as I've drawn it, it's very, very nice and smoothly concave. They're usually a little bit messier than that, and so you often have heuristic optimization being there as well. So any of you who are looking at this as a possible research program, I would plug either of these two as directions to look as if you've already got a comparative advantage in those, otherwise to look forward to that. Simulated annealing, genetic algorithms, these are all methods of locally searching through a landscape and then eventually hoping to find a global optimizer or class of global optimizers. Now, let's bring it all together. You bring the valuations, you bring how to build these Pareto frontiers together, and what you have then is a mechanism design problem, a formal design problem for the token. Token recipients have private information, what they expect from the token itself. It's their hidden information. It's unique to themselves. Mechanism design would select a token type. In this case, let's say we're looking at a way to disseminate the token, either from an ICO or an airdrop into people's wallets, a term sheet similar to venture cap, and so on. But you need the following criteria to hold. First, you need incentive compatibility. The recipients have to gain the tokens according to their type. They have to have truthful revelation. And shameless plug, I'll have a working paper on that coming out in May. The creator itself has to realize its own multi-objective goal because it has its own goals for what type of token it's trying to release. There's a reason for this token to exist to begin with. And finally, the outcome has to lie on the Pareto frontier for both parties, and that's where the constraints come in. It can be that there is no equilibrium as stated, and then one side is going to have to give. And what's that? Well, that's bargaining theory. Then you're going to have creators of tokens and recipients of tokens bargaining about how this token can be valued. Now, one elephant in the room. Once you've built this, once you've got a token from your mechanism design, well, the token becomes a function of the mechanism you've chosen. And in particular, regulation is the thing that's defining the rules of the game that you use your mechanism design problem to begin with. You need to be able to adhere to certain things that are laid down by, unfortunately, probably perpetually centralized authority in the form of laws. And this is regardless of what the creators of a token say the token is for. This is what is getting Tezos and other ICOs into trouble. They say, but look, it was just a way to do better governance. And regulators say that's not true. This is a security. Now, at the moment, the current regulatory structure is unknown. In fact, they will not give you an answer if you ask regulators now at the European Commission level. They will say, we have an observatory, a blockchain observatory. We are looking at how blockchain and tokens are in use. And if you say, please give us some guidance, we're a startup, we want to know how we're supposed to be funding this with a token, they say, we have an observatory. We have a blockchain observatory, and we're looking, and we're looking, and we're looking. But rest assured, once they decide on what it is that they want to see, you will get existing legal statute that will be modified to apply to tokens. And then you will get new Know Your Customer, anti-money laundering, and anti-fraud legislation that will be applied to this because of the pseudonymous character of cryptocurrencies. This is where I think advocacy has a big part to play. If people can communicate to regulatory bodies that there is a way to design these instruments so that nobody is doing anything duplicitous, so that what's being designed is being designed optimally for both the creator of the token and the recipient, then I think you'll be able to see novel legislation and regulation being applied rather than simply cookie-cutting securities laws and placing them on top of tokens. Because what we're going to see from this is we're going to see stymieing and quelling from fear of tokens that are going to be released. People will simply withhold and stop. And there are already examples of high-profile token launches that were stopped because they simply weren't sure which way regulators were going to jump. And nobody wants to be caught retroactively, right? One of the things about a crowdfunding sale is that once you've got the cash, you tend to spend it. So if somebody comes to you 5 years later and says, actually, your ICO is illegal, well, you've got problems, right? Because typically you can't just pay back the money. There's a fine, and there's an investigation, and it's expensive. So for those of you who are regulators in the audience, I'm not dissing you at all. This is a way forward, a way through being the guy holding the piece of paper on the right in Bruegel's painting to cut through the chaff, as it were. Okay. So summing up, we currently have a fairly poor understanding of how to do valuation of tokens at this point in time. Mechanism design is a way forward to be able to get truthful behavior truthful eliciting of individual preferences on the basis of what they would like the token to be, both from the creator side and the recipient. Now, this requires an understanding of game theory, of contract theory, and a theory of incentives. And it requires an appreciation of economic engineering, financial engineering, securities design, and regulation. So for economists and financial economists and wannabes, this is a great application area to look into. This is where the next springboard will come. I'll put out a few holy grail achievements, things that we would hope that we can get out of such a research program or an interest program. Given a set of desired token values, what's the optimal token sale mechanism? Given a protocol or blockchain specification, what is it that we should actually design for the token type? Instead of thinking, gee, I'd like to have this be this kind of token, actually look for the token type to have. Given a token type, state the optimal regulatory structure so that it falls under a particular set of rules that everybody can understand and everybody can see, so that no one is confused about what their token is actually doing when somebody gets around to telling you. And the end game is to create a sustainable and stable cryptocurrency, and 99% of the bad press from cryptocurrencies is simply due to speculation. So removing that from the equation by unbundling these values provides stability, covering both the fiat money use cases and also the financial asset use cases, and also introducing things that neither of these particular existing instruments can do in a new and unique, and I think in a revolutionary way. Thanks very much. I appreciate that. And disclaimer.